Okay, I think you can download the syllabus from the Moodle website. And okay. Let's go back to our outline syllabus here. So about the course aim and intended learning outcome, all these are required by our senior management, so I just skip them. So this is the lecture schedule. So today we will talk about the nature of scientific research. I will distinguish qualitative research from quantitative research. Qualitative, that means, as the video I show you at the beginning of the class, is that it's about doing some observation, interviewing, all this kind of thing. Quantitative research is about numbers. That means it's related to statistics. So these are two types of what field of research methods. Okay, and week 2 I will talk about the qualitative field research. That means I will give you a very brief introduction of qualitative research, because qualitative research methods are difficult to teach because there are no standard procedures for doing that. It depends on the researcher's experience of doing people. For example, when you do the in-depth interview, that means trying to ask people questions, it is about some kind of experience. Once you develop your skill set, then you will more comfortably to ask people questions and ask some valid questions. Asking valid questions also depend upon your own knowledge as well. So this is why qualitative research methods are difficult to teach. But anyway, I will give you a very brief introduction.
Sir?
Yeah.
Mr.
Right?
Lee,
Yeah.
is qualitative, is qualitative research about reasoning?
Both are about reasoning. All the research methods are about reasoning. Later on, I will talk more about that. Okay. Maybe we just go through the outline first. Okay.
Okay.
So the third week, we will talk about the logic of scientific inferences and quantitative research designs. In this case, I mean, we will focus upon the so-called deductive logic and quantitative research. Actually, we have, I think you all learn about induction and deduction. Okay, so the logic of qualitative research is induction. The logic of quantitative research is deduction. So this is all about logic. Okay, and then in week 4, we will talk about conceptualization, operationalization, and measurement. So that means how to come up with some concept, for example, political participation. So what do you mean by political participation? So when you try to clarify that terms, that concept, this is the process of conceptualization. Once you know about the meaning of political participation, then you want to know how to measure it, how to observe it. So this is the process of operationalization. That means you transform your concept into some observable characteristic. Okay. Once they are observable, then that means you can measure that. So this is the third part, the measurement. Okay. And all these three are very, very important in quantitative research. That means related to number. You want to count. This is about the magnitude. Okay. So week 4, we will talk about that. Week 5, we will talk about sampling and survey research. Survey is one of the important tools used by social scientists in order to find out what is happening in the world. So we will talk about survey. But once we got the survey result, we are not so sure whether those results are valid or not. So it depends on how we get our informants. So this is related to sampling. Okay. So week 6 is about questionnaire design, indexes, scales, and typology. So when you design your survey, so you need a questionnaire. So there are some rules to construct a valid questionnaire. So this is related to questionnaire design. And then indexes and scale and typology, that means when we try to measure people's, for example, political participation, whether he or she has a high political participation level or low political participation level, that means we are constructing some kind of index or scale to measure the magnitude of their political participation level. Okay.
So, sir, Mr. Lee.
Yeah.
So I think like we're basically learning how to do the honors, like how we're preparing for the honors course in bachelor's. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, actually, in a lot of bachelor degrees program, they require you to study research method again, because they actually, but some program you can do the credit transfer. So this is about degree program. Again, this is not the content of the course. Okay, so but anyway, this is very important, especially for PAM and SS students. You need to do your final year project. When you do your final year project, that means you need to use this kind of method, no matter is it quantitative or qualitative research methods. Okay. So for the week 7, normally PAM and SS student won't do that. That is experiment. But psychology student, okay, psychology student will mostly do experiment. So, but anyway, I will introduce experiment to you. So if you like, you can do some kind of experiment in your final year project as well. So that's week 7. So I briefly talk about several methods I think you will use in your final year project or in future in your degree program. And then the later part of this course will deal with some kind of statistical analysis. So from week 8 to week 13 all these lectures will be concentrated on statistics. So week 8 we'll talk about very simple statistics, that is descriptive statistics, how to describe some figures. So week 9 and week 10 we'll talk about inferential statistics. These are more difficult ones. I mean, how to infer the result from a sample to the population. A sample, that means you, for example, you want to know about the level of political participation of young people. So we draw a sample out of, say, 2 or 3 million youngsters in Hong Kong. And our sample would be, say, 1,000 young people. So the question about inferential statistics is that when we draw some result from 1,000 youngsters in Hong Kong, can we use those results, infer the characteristic of political participation level of 2 or 3 million young people in Hong Kong? So this is what inferential statistics is about. Let me try to make some inferences from a small sample to a large population. So week 9 and week 10 we'll deal with it. And then week 11, week 12, and week 13, we will deal with different types of statistical analysis. That is, it depends on what kind of variable you are studying. Okay, so we have correlation and linear regression. We have cost tabulation. And week 13, that's ANOVA. This is a short form for analysis of variance and t-test. Okay, so from week 8 to week 13, some of you may find it very, very difficult because you are not very comfortable of numbers. But anyway, you need to confront them. But anyway, remember I said at the very beginning, I just need you to interpret the figures, interpret the numbers you got. You don't need to do all kind of mathematical equation or calculation or maybe simple calculation, but not very difficult calculation, because all this calculation will be done by the software SPSS. Okay, so during the tutorial, the tutor will show you how to use SPSS, and in a way, maybe you may find a way to download the SPSS software. You can find your way, but they have a trial version. I think you can use it for 30 days. Okay, and sometime in the past, students just use that 30 days to do their final year project instead of doing the social research assignment. Anyway, because in the past they can go to the lab and do it and use SPSS, but this is not possible for this semester anyway. So the required reading is just one. This one. There are different versions of the textbook, The Practice of Social Research. I think this is the 9th edition, something like that. So I remember I studied research method in my undergraduate. I used the first edition. Now this is 9th or 10th edition. So in my view, any edition is fine. Okay, you know that all textbooks try to modify a little bit and then and publish a new version in order to get more money. Okay, so this is a textbook. Okay, I think you can also find you have some sources to find an ebook of it, and I think 2 of them reserved in the Telford library. So these are the required reading. And then anyway, I give you very detailed handout. So actually, when you read my handout, that may be sufficient. So for the SPSS, I give you two open source stuff. So you can download it here. This is how to use a basic tutorial of using SPSS. So I can show you right now. So this is a basic tutorial, and there are some data set for you. They have very clear outline of doing SPSS, using and doing SPSS. So you can see cost tabulation, comparing mean, that means t-test and ANOVA, correlation and regression. All these three topics I will teach. And about multivariate analysis, you can skip that chapters. So you can see you can download the whole tutorial. I think you can find somewhere here. Okay, so this is another one. So this is another here. So this is the tag. Okay, you can click simply here. So you can download it about the SPSS, the whole lecture and now about SPSS. You can download it for free. So there are two essential readings. The tutorial schedule. Unfortunately, our college decided that we will have 1 hour tutorial in this semester. In the past, we have 2 hours by alternate weeks, but this semester, our senior management decided we can only have 1 hour tutorial each week. So I need to restructure the whole tutorial arrangement. So you can see these are the tutorial arrangement. So for the first one, this is a kind of grouping. That means because you need to do some group work. So this is grouping, and the tutor will introduce himself or herself to you. So this is all about logistics. Okay. And from the second week onward, you will have some in-class exercise. That means you need to discuss some material I gave you and discuss it online during the tutorial. Okay, so you can see from the schedule here. So I won't go through all of them. And in week 4, the tutor will show you how to do how to find relevant literature. So this is to do your literature review. For example, I don't know whether you use Google Scholar or not, or whether you go to the Yoda, I mean not Hong Kong, the Australian one, the University of Wollongong online library, and try to find some reading for you, some article, journal article, something like that. This is pretty much like the CityU website. You just type the title and then they give you a lot of things to see whether they have that resources or not. So you can download all the online material. Unfortunately, for non-online, non-Gbook or e-journal stuff, they are in Australia. You cannot request. I don't think you can request them to send you by mail or whatever. It's too expensive. Okay. So these are the lecture schedule. Okay. So from week 9 to week 12, your tutor will demonstrate how to use SPSS. Okay. And indeed, even without your tutor's demonstration, it is pretty easy to find all these kind of SPSS demonstration. So you go to YouTube again, just type SPSS. Okay, for example, there are Chinese one as well. So for example, SPSS data entry, how to enter data in SPSS. So you can see that there are a lot of YouTube video telling you how to use SPSS. Okay. So learning SPSS in 15 minutes, something like that. Okay. So I give free control of the tutorial format for your to your tutors. That means maybe your tutor just show you some YouTube video, I don't know, or maybe he or she will do it online. Okay, for you. Anyway, you need to get the SPSS software. So how to get it? So this is SPSS. Just type SPSS. So we in Hong Kong, you can go through that, and Yeah, this is try SPSS modular for free, try for free, something like that. So you can get a trial version of SPSS, but with limited time. Okay. Another thing is about assessment. I did not design the course. So actually in the past, it was taught by another colleague, but she left. So I picked up this actually last semester, and I do not have the control over the assignment, the workload, because they are all in the course document. And the course document was approved by the Hong Kong CAA, that means the Hong Kong Accreditation Authority. And if I want to change any aspect of the course document, we need to submit to the accreditation authority again. So the college won't allow it. So this is why. So I try to reduce the workload by reducing the word limit, but not the items. I mean, you need to do all these items. Okay. So you need to do a research proposal in group, and which constitute 30% of your grade. And that is the research proposal. And the critique of a research report, that means I will give you a journal article, and you need to comment on that article to see how you can improve it or whether there are problems in that article. And then the tutorial participation, that means you need to participate. That means when doing some in-class exercise, you need to voice out, you need to participate, you need to ask questions, something like that. So that is tutorial participation. So this is 5%. And then there are two tests, the midterm test and the end of term test. Last semester, I decided that because the limited time and because the students were not quite familiar with online teachings, I just have an end of term test. They prefer just one test instead of two tests. But anyway, it will count 40%. So it's up to you. I don't care. You can have one end of term test or two, including a midterm test. It's up to you. Maybe in week 3 or week 4, I'll ask you your preference. Okay. So whether you want to split them into two or and do it one and for all. Okay. So that is the component of assessment. So this is 40%. And those taxes will be multiple choice question, online multiple choice test. Okay. So this is the grade. This is common, I think, all of you, because you are E2 student, and actually you know how the grading works. So if you got 85 or above, you will get A+. And actually, don't worry about that. At the end of the class, at the end of this course, I will moderate your score. Okay, I will moderate your score to see how many of you can get a better result by maybe adding more points to you. But anyway, so this is at the end of the semester. Okay. Something important our associate dean want me to emphasize in all of my courses. The first one is rules on academic honesty. Plagiarism would not be allowed. So that means when you do your proposal, when you do your whatever papers, something like that, you need to do referencing, especially in text citation. In text citation, you know what in text citation is. So whenever you quote somebody's wording, you copy something from other sources, you need to put a quotation mark and reference it. So this is the basic rule of the academics. So if you fail to do that, you may suspect to be committing plagiarism, and plagiarism will not be tolerated. So if plagiarism is discovered, you will get 0 mark for the work. So you need to submit all your work, written words, to turn it in Moodle. Okay, and you also need to submit a soft copy to your tutor as well. Okay, to make sure your work, sorry, the work can reach your tutor. Okay. Another one is academic regulation on illness or other circumstances affecting assessment. For example, you missed the test. So what will you do? You need to submit your application within the 5 working days. You need to produce evidence like medical certificate to the General Office of Social Science, the Faculty of Social Science, and then they will do a bit. Okay, so remember that's no later than 5 working days. That is 20%. 20%, you can see that in the assessment. If you fail to submit your research proposal, written a research report, or attending the tests, then you need to do that kind of procedures. Go to the General Office of Faculty of Social Sciences, FSS, and then submit your evidence. And of course, you may need to fill some form. I don't know. I haven't go through the process yet. So anyway, so this is what you need to do. How about less than 20%? Then you need to inform me and the tutor about that. And then if we find that your absence of submission, the reason for it is reasonable, then we will give you some makeup. Okay, so that is the another thing you need to do. About review of course grade. So we prefer informal resolution. Just talk to your course examiner or tutor to see what happened. If you are not very satisfied, then you can go through the formal procedures for review. But the formal procedure of review, you need to remember that. This is written in the school regulation, the college regulation. This agreement with the academic judgment of the course examiner does not constitute a valid ground for formal review. They will ignore you if you say that the teacher just grade my work unfairly, or actually he has biases. Actually, I think my work is better than others, and I should get a better grade, something like that. Then it is not an excuse. It is not a reason for formal procedures for review. This is set in the regulation. Okay, there are only 2 circumstances you can file the formal review. The first one is a procedural irregularity in the assessment process. For example, when you go to the examination hall and suddenly someone stopped you entering in, and so that you lost, say, half an hour to do your examination, then this is a procedural irregularity. Or the second one is related to online teaching. When you do your online test, there's something wrong with your computer. Then you can file for formal procedures. If informal solution doesn't work, that means when you talk to your course examiner, he or she didn't accept it, then you can file for formal procedures if your computer was broken during the test or during the examination. Okay. The second one is there exist circumstances that impact the course grade awarded, and the student was unable to bring them to the attention of the course examiner prior to the assessment or for valid reasons. Okay, so in this case, that means, for example, you are sick and actually you submit your application, but your course examiner didn't recognize it and give you a failed grade, something like that, and you can file for formal procedures for review. So you can see that the situation for formal procedural review is very limited. Okay, and when you do that, you need to do it within 22 working days, and you need to write a letter to the associate dean, that means Jiak-Yu, and can state the ground on which the request for review is made, include a description of the relevant facts, and provide supporting evidence. So this is very, very troublesome. So this is why I prefer you go to me instead of doing the formal procedures for review, because in this course, we have several tutors. So if you think that some tutor are more lenient, giving higher grades, but some are very strict, then tell me. I will do the moderation afterward. Okay, I always do the moderation, and I try to ensure at least 1/4 of you get an A- or above. Okay, I mean every 1 out of 4 students, I think you deserve A- or above. Okay, anyway, so this is my policy. Now we go through some kind of assignment. For the research report, that's 30%. So I give you details of requirement for research proposal. I think I put it in Moodle. I need to check it again because just like the syllabus, I forgot to upload it. Okay. So the deadline for proposal is November 27th. This is Friday, before noon. You need to submit to turn it in Moodle before that. And then you need to submit a hard copy, okay? Not a hard copy, maybe a soft copy to your tutor. Hard or soft copy, because I don't care, because sometimes some teacher prefer hard copy. They won't read stuff on screen, okay? But maybe I change it a little bit. You can submit a soft copy to your tutor as well, okay? So if the proposal is done by a group, only one member needs to upload the file, okay? Mark will be deducted for late submission. For every 24 hours, 3 marks will be deducted, okay? So if you cannot comply with the deadline, again, because it's called it weighs 30%, you need to present your case to the general office within 5 working days. Plagiarism is not allowed, and you can do it in a group of 5 students or less. Okay, that means you can form a group of 5 and do your proposal. But how about groups with less than 5 students? They will not get preferential treatment. For example, you want to do it alone, and you tell your tutor that because I am just one-man band, one girl band, so you should give me higher mark. No, sorry, it won't, because this is your choice. So if you have less than 5 people, this group won't get any preferential treatment at all. That means you will be graded just the same as the other group with 5 students. Okay, so this is why you need to form your group wisely. Okay, so in a case there's some free riders in your group, then report to your tutor immediately. Okay, and also you need to submit a kind of assignment cover page here. And so this is assignment cover sheet. So you need to put the topic, assignment, and then you have this something like this. This is a kind of peer review. So if you have some free rider, you just write something here, a 0% of contribution, something like that. All student has to be do this, okay? And you need to sign your name. So this is the cover sheet. This is a kind of peer review procedures to ensure there's no free rider in your group. For any written work, you need to attach this cover sheet. For the proposal, of course, if it's an individual work, you don't need to. You just write your name, and then your contribution will be 100%, something like that. Okay. So this is the formal procedures for to avoid free rider in your group. The criteria of research proposal, again, the deadline is here, December 4th. Okay, the same like this. But because this is individual work, that means there won't be any free rider at all. So that is the critique. And the tasks, there will be 2 tasks. Originally, I planned to have in week 8. But if you decide to have 1 task instead of 2 tasks, then let me know. I will ask you, maybe I create a Google form, you can vote for it. Okay? So this is the tasks. Just separate or maybe for those assignment sheet, I think I put it somewhere. Okay, this is syllabus. Okay, maybe I forgot to put it. So anyway, we have some kind of so this is SR instruction. So I put it later on. So this is this is some detailed way for doing your research proposal. Sorry, okay. So I'm still very unfamiliar with Moodles. Okay. And one more thing about the Moodle. If you notice that some students cannot log in to the Moodle, there may be something to do with this. I think you received this email from our vice president. Actually, because Moodle said the time is at the Australian time. So this is why sometimes you are unable to join the online classes, okay? Because we didn't know that, okay? Until something happens, something wrong. And then we check and finally, at least our IT team in our college discovered that. For example, I said 1 o'clock for this class, but actually this is Australian time, not Hong Kong time. So this is why a lot of you cannot join. And actually there's something happened here. But I discovered that a few days ago. So this is why some of you can join. But if you fail to adjust your own time zone in your Moodle, something like that, then you may have problem joining some online lectures or tutorial. Okay, so I think you received this email this morning, I think. Okay, any question about the syllabus, about the assessment, about the other things? If you have a question, just type in the chat room. No? Okay. So I will put the instruction for assignment, I mean the research proposal and the critique in the Moodle site after the class. Okay. Now we go to the lectures. So the nature of social research. As the video I showed you at the beginning of the class, there are two types of methods. One is, okay, so one is the qualitative research, another is the quantitative research. So qualitative and quantitative methods. So you can see that, okay. So the nature, before going through these two types of research method, I briefly talk about the nature of social sciences. So social science try to imitate what happened in the natural science. So what is natural science? Science requires a set of systematic rules of procedures. Why? Because when you try to discover how atom works, atom, that means this is physics, you notice that they need to do some experiment in physics lab, in chemistry lab, whatever. If you want to know about the Big Bang theory, so in that case, you need the telescope to observe the sky. So when you do that, it requires some kind of procedures. So science is about a systematic way to discovering the nature, discovering the world. Okay, so accordingly, that is any system of knowledge that is concerned with the physical world and its phenomena that entails unbiased observation and systematic experimentation. So these two terms are very important. Unbiased observation, it has to be unbiased, okay? And systematic experimentation. That means you try to do some kind of trial and error systematically. So how about social science? Social science try to imitate the scientific method. Social scientists also try to observe the world unbiasedly and try to use some standard procedures to explore the world, but we are dealing with human behaviors. Human behavior can be changed over time, but our physical world won't. So that means sometimes the result, say 100 years ago, may be very different from 100 years later in social science. But for the science, the natural science, they won't change. They are facts forever, eternal facts. Okay. But anyway, for us, this is quite different. Okay. And for both natural science and social sciences, there's one thing in common. Researchers must begin with a research question. Okay, that means we need to ask a question. And by using research method, we are trying to find some empirical data to answer that question. So every social science or every natural science research start with a research question. Okay, so this is why when you do your research proposal, first of all, you ask yourself, what kind of question are you interested in? Okay, for example, I just give you a research question. Why younger people are more likely to join some protest, to join demonstration than older people? So maybe this is one kind of research question we want to ask, but it is very specific, this kind of question. You can ask a more general question. How different people participate in, say, the demonstration or protests. Anyway, so it is how you frame your research. Actually, when you start with your research question, you can always modify it, change it when you find some new data, or when you find some new study, or through literature review, you find out that your answer has been answered a long time ago, then you just refine, modify your research question. So this is one, for every research project, you start with a research question. And then you think about the data, okay? The accessibility of the data set. That means what kind of data do we need to answer the research question we post? Okay, for example, my question is, what kind of people will join protests and demonstration? So the data maybe, you may think that I can interview people for that. Okay, interview people for that. For example, Benny To is doing his PhD research about the extradition movement and the extradition movement, and he tried to interview students, interview young people. So interview is one of the data you want. Or some of my friends try to do some survey. Survey is another type of data. You want to answer your research question. They send an online questionnaire to a lot of young people to answer a number of questions to see their so-called participation level, something like that. So this is the accessibility of data. This is the second part you need to consider. Once you have your research question, then you ask yourself, what kind of data do I need to answer my questions? Either they are qualitative in nature, that means like interview, or quantitative in nature. I want the survey result. How many % of young people join the protests, something like that. Okay, so this is the second part. The third part is quantitative, quantify, whether they are quantified. That means the third part differentiate the qualitative research and quantitative research. So interview data, for example, you ask yourself, do I need to make it into numbers, quantify it? That means whether they can be turned into number. So when I talk about how many young people join the anti-extradition movement, so this is like a kind of percentage. So this is quantified. Okay, so that means the third question you want to ask is whether you want to do it qualitatively or quantitatively. Okay, so this is some kind of standard procedures. So when you do your research proposal, when you try to look at other people's research report, the first thing you want to find out is what kind of research question of that report. Or when you do some proposal, what is your research question? This is the starting point. And then the second point is, what kind of data do I need? Okay, or accessibility. That means because of limited time, because of limited resources, because of a lot of situational factors. For example, right now, the pandemic situation, you cannot do a face-to-face survey. So instead of doing face-to-face survey, you may use online survey, something like that. So this is the accessibility of data. This is the second part. You need to ask yourself, or you need to look at the report you are examining or you are criticizing. Okay, so the third part is whether they are quantified. So for report, whether they quantify the stuff wrongly, they do some statistical analysis wrongly. Or you ask yourself, I'm not very comfortable with statistical analysis, or maybe I won't quantify them. So in that case, I mean, you stick to the qualitative research method. So remember, these three questions are very, very important for you. This is at the beginner level. I mean, for whatever research, you start off thinking about these three questions. The first one, research question. The second question, what kind of data do I need? Can I get the data? Okay. The third one is whether the data in terms of number or in terms of quantity, that means the qualitative research. Okay. So scientific procedures, that different way to do the scientific procedures. The first one is pure, descriptive, basic of theoretical analysis, in which the design product is understanding the phenomenon. It's related to types of research we want to do, what we call the pure research. Pure research, that means we don't need to apply it. We just want to understand it. Okay. For example, physics, chemistry, biology, all these natural science subjects aim at understanding the phenomenon. You cannot apply it. Okay. And the second one is so-called applied research. Applied research, for example, engineering. Engineering is applying physics in the real world, trying to build something using some physics laws. Okay, so that is the apply. Like engineering, normative or practical analysis. Normative or practical analysis, for example, in social science, we want to know whether it is good or not good to join protesters, something like that. Okay, so what is scientific procedure? Scientific procedure is the step. There are several steps you need to follow. That is the meaning of procedures. That means when you try to do science, no matter it's natural science or social science, you need to follow some steps. For example, earlier I talked about the three questions. So the first step is to ask yourself what kind of research topic you want to do, what kind of research question you are exploring. So this is the first step. The second step is what kind of data do I need to answer the questions? So that is the second step. The third step is the data quantifiable? Is the data need to be transformed into numbers? So this is the first step. So remember, when we talk about scientific procedures, it's about different steps, standard steps to do the social research, okay? Or scientific research, if you like. So in this case, scientific research, that means when you do something pure research and applied research are two different things. Pure research, you don't need to consider the practical significance. But for the applied research, you need to consider the practical significance. So in this case, that means when you try to justify your research, whether your research is worth doing, you can justify in two ways. The first one is pure. That means it has theoretical experience, theoretical significance. That means it helps you to understand the phenomenon, understand the world, no matter it's the nature or the social world. Applied, that means we can use the result to help people in social science. Okay, so this is the applied research. So this is the practical significance. Sorry. So in a way, so that means when we talk about the pure research, so this is like about theoretical significance. When we talk about applied research, so that is the practical significance. So this is the way you try to justify your research. So people may ask, is your research worth doing? Then you can answer them with this kind of significance. Either it's
Sir, I have a question. Now, if pure research is about theoretical significance and applied is about practical, isn't the practical significance based? No, I mean, isn't theoretical significance based on practical?
No, of course not. You can understand how the world, how the galaxy works, but it won't give you any practical significance. You want to understand you know, the Big Bang theory, right?
Yes,
How
yes.
our universe appear. So is there any practical significance for you in your everyday life? Of course not.
No. Yes,
Okay,
no.
so that is pure. You get what I mean?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, so that is the scientific procedures. Now we talk about different steps. So these are the different steps, especially for quantitative research. For qualitative research, this is less systematic. So this is why a lot of so-called scientific mind people like quantitative research rather than qualitative research. This is why our government want quantitative research more than qualitative research. Okay, because there are some systematic way to do it. There are very clear steps to do quantitative research. But the step for doing qualitative research may be not so clear. So later on in the lecture, I talk about qualitative research. I will explain more. But anyway, for any research procedures, there are definitely some steps. So these are the steps. First of all, once you have your research question, when you determine your you can access to the data and whether your data can be quantified or not, then you need to do a literature review. What is literature review? Literature review is searching for the existing research finding about your research question. Why do you do that? First of all, you may ask the question. It has been already answered. Okay? If your research question has been answered, do you need to do it again? Of course not. So this is why, for one thing, you need to do the literature review. For the second thing is, if you want to answer your research question, but you find out that there are no specifiable satisfactory answers to it, then you can do your research and you can follow the others to explore how you do it. Okay, how to refine your research question or how to use their, say, questionnaire to do your research here. For example, you find out that a lot of people doing political participation study in the United States, and they have their questionnaire. So you can borrow their questionnaire and translate it in say in Chinese in Hong Kong to explore some youngster, Hong Kong Chinese youngster. Okay, so through literature review, you try to find out what to do. Actually, the literature review give you hints, give you cues for conceptualization, for operationalization, as well as for measurement. Okay, so this is what you need to do the literature review. So in your research proposal, you are required to at least consult several journal articles. Of course, you can do some literature review on news report, but this is not so good. You need to do it on some journal articles. So this is why you need to do using Google Scholar or go to the UOW library to database. There are a lot of UOW have some good database. You can search the relevant journal articles for your research questions. Okay, and then you need to derive hypotheses from the literature review. Hypothesis, that means from the existing literature, what would you expect you will find? Hypothesis is some guesses about the world, some guesses about the answers to your research questions. So you need to derive these hypotheses from your literature review. That means from previous study, what kind of possible answers to your research question, but you are not so sure. So this is why you need to do the research. But if you are sure there are some certain answers to your research question, then you may ask yourself, why should I do it again? If those questions, my research question has been answered. So, but of course, when you do something worth doing, that means it remains unresolved. Your research question remains unresolved. So this is why you, before collecting data, you need to provide some expectation. You need to provide some kind of guesses of the answers to your research question. So this is what hypothesis meant. Okay, so deriving hypothesis from the literature review, and then you need to do the research design. Research design is how do I get the data that is sufficiently to answer my research question? So research design is about how you get your data. Okay. And then once you determine the research design actually about methods. So experiment, you decide to use experiment to collect your data to answer your research question, or you decide to use a survey to collect data to answer a question. Then Ito decided to use in-depth interview and participant observation to collect data to answer his research questions. So this is all about methods. So this is research design. Once the research design is determined, then you can do the data collection. Follow the procedure specified in your research design. So that is data collection. Do survey, and you decide the online survey. So you construct an online questionnaire and try to get a lot of emails and email your questionnaire out, your informant to do it online, something like that. So that is the data collection. And after getting the data, you can do your data analysis. Okay, so that is the statistical analysis for Benny for qualitative data. Then you need to do some, say, coding or something like that. I won't teach about coding, but I will mention about that. That means you need to do some coding, try to compare and contrast all this kind of thing. So that is data analysis. And finally, after data analysis, you can draw some implication and you can draw your conclusion. That means the answers to your research question. So why do we need to formulate some hypothesis at the very beginning? So you, in the conclusion, you may answer something like that. My original guesses, that means the hypothesis, are correct or not. They are correct, so this is your conclusion. Or they are wrong, so this is another conclusion. And if they are correct or wrong, what kind of implication for you? So for the theories, or even for the practical solution you are suggesting. Okay. So in this case, the conclusion is actually a conclusion. Conclude everything you have done. So this is basically different step or procedures. This is pretty clear. So if you want to draw it like a diagram, it's pretty easy. Where's the here? Okay. So you start with a research question. So you ask yourself, what phenomenon, in this case, social phenomenon, because you are doing social research, what social phenomenon you are interested in, and what is your aim and objective. Aim and objective, that means this research with question, that means you want to solve a theoretical issue or a practical issue. Okay, whether theoretical or both. Actually, you can deal with both. Actually, we always include both in our research proposal. A proposal is a blueprint. You try to use it to convince people that your research is worth doing. For me, for teachers like me, for Benny needs to convince his advisor his research is worth doing. Okay, so this is why we need to say some kind of what we call the importance. So our research are very important, something like that. Okay, importance. So this is a research question. Once we determine our research question, then we may ask what kind of data we want. Okay, when we talk about data, that means it involves research design, how you collect your data. And research design also about the nature of your data. Is your data that's related to question 3, whether your data can be quantified or not. Okay, difficult to write here. So whether they can be turned into number. Okay. So in this case, so this is the second part, the research design. And when you do that, I mean, you, in your research proposal, through literature review, in between there's a literature review. Through the literature review, you derive some answers to your possible answer to your research question. These possible answers become a guideline for you to do the data analysis and data collection. Okay, because there may be a very large scope for you to answer your research question, but deriving hypothesis, deriving some kind of answer to your research question through literature review, then you can narrow down your research scope to make it manageable. Okay, so then you collect your data to see whether this predicted or expected answer are correct or not. So if they are correct, then you can say something. If they are not, you can also say something. So this is after doing the data analysis, you can make your conclusion. Okay. So this is the standard step. So this is why when we talk about science, this is basically about procedures. There's some different steps in doing to getting your research question answered.
So, Mr. Lee.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the previous slide? The previous slide.
This one?
Yes. No. Yeah, this one. Yeah, research process. Now, when you say drawing implications for the theory is concerned, does this mean that we have to make it usable for other people?
For example, when you talk about theories, I mean, how can you improve the theory? For example, the theory you have examined in your literature review, they are wrong. So this is the implication. You know what I mean? These theories are wrong, or maybe they need to be modified.
Okay.
Okay. So that means you can do whatever you want to modify your theories, to criticize your theories, something like that. Or maybe you can draw a further direction how to have some kind of theoretical development. So it all depends on your data analysis and your conclusion. Okay. Now we go to another one is causality. I think is that all of you have taken the class critical thinking, right? All of you?
Yes.
Okay. So when you took the class critical thinking, I think Benny Chow talked about causality, the causal relationship, right? Did he? Or you just can't remember? So anyway, I try to do it again. So when we talk about causality, that means in science or in social science, we always want to find out the causes, okay, of some phenomenon. So this is related to causality. Causality, in this case, in social research, we always distinguish two types of things. What we call independent variable and dependent variable. So you know that on this independent variable and dependent variable. Independent variable are the causes. Dependent variables are the effects. So when we talk about whether independent variable has some causal relationship onto the dependent variable, we are talking about causality. So in this case, there are three conditions for causality. The first one is covariation. What is covariation? That means when there are some movement of the independent variable, we can observe the same pattern in the dependent variable, dependent variable. So this is a kind of covariation. That means covariate, that means they varies together. For example, I give you just a very simple example. When you get a higher educational level, so that you move from, say, secondary school to tertiary education. So this is the kind of movement. Then your future salary will increase. So this is actually in the same direction. So that means that is your educational level. If educational level increase, then your future salary will increase. So you may think that education is a cause of your future salary level. So this is a kind of covariation. Why covariation is a condition? Just imagine that. If your education level increase or decrease, it doesn't affect your salary. That means your salary, your future salary doesn't change at all. Just imagine that. Do you still think that education is the cause of your salary? Covariation, that means when the independent variable move, the dependent variable also move. They can move in the same direction. That is positive covariation. The negative one is when the independent variable move upward, the dependent variable move downward. Then that is negative. When educational level increase or decrease, the dependent variable doesn't move at all. So this is no covariation. Okay. So just ask yourself, if your educational level increase or decrease doesn't affect your future salary, do you think that education is still a cause of your salary? Correct? What do you think? So would you study more? Will you say going to degree program? Will you go to the master program or even PhD program? If you find out that no matter how many years you study, it won't affect, it won't affect your salaries. Of course not. No, you won't study. So this is why causality, the first condition for causality is covariation. If they do not covariate either in positive direction or negative direction, then you won't consider it as a cause. So this is one way to talk about it. So the first condition for causality is covariation. Okay. And then the second condition is that causal direction. Causal direction, that means the cause cannot appear after the effect. Of course, this is pretty logical. Okay. The cause cannot appear in time after the effect. So that means you need to establish the kind of causal direction. For example, I give you one thing. In social science, especially in sociology, there's one theory talking about classes. This is what we call the status attainment model. Status attainment model is your father education and your mother education actually affect your educational level. That means sometimes your father education, if your father education is higher or your mother education is higher, normally your education level is also higher than the others. So in this case, this is a kind of status attainment model. So this is why in Cantonese, 成功靠父母幹啊嘛 ，okay？ 或者成功靠父幹。In that case, I mean, if your father is rich, then you will be rich. So this is a status attainment model. So in this case, it is pretty obvious, right? But anyway, but you say that this is the causal direction. If you say that your education actually caused your father's education, then in this case, of course, they may be covariant. They covariate, right? But the causal direction are different. Your father being educated before you. So this is the causal direction. Okay. But you say that your education caused your father's education. It is impossible because your father being educated before you are educated. Okay. So in this case, that means that this is the time-pro relationship in terms of time. So this is pretty obvious. Okay. And then the condition 3 is the most difficult one. That is non-spuriousness. Non-spuriousness, that means no other variable cause changes in both dependent and independent variable. Or sometimes we call them third variables or control variable. So you may get these two words occasionally in sometimes. So third variables. Oh, shit. Third variable or control variable. What does that mean? So in this case, something like this. For example, you find out that ice cream consumption is covariant with crime rate. Okay, ice cream consumption when ice cream consumption is higher, then the crime rate is higher. So they are covariant. Okay, and you find out that people consume ice cream before committing crime, something like that. What? So can you say that eating ice cream causes you crime? So in this case, that means they are correlated, they are covariated, and they have some kind of causal time temporal sequence, but they may be caused by a third variable or a control variable, that is the temperature. Okay, for example, the temperature actually affect people consuming ice cream and actually causing people getting angry easily or getting annoyed easily, and they make them commit some violent crime, something like that. So in that case, that means their covariation is actually caused by a third variable, temperature. Okay, so in this case, whenever you want to establish a valid causality, a causal relationship, you need to eliminate all these third variable. You try to control it. What do you mean by control? So this is why sometimes we call them control variables. Control variable is that to make them constant, to make them unchanged. If they unchanged, that means they don't have any effect upon, say, ice cream consumption and crime rate. So if that means you try to eliminate the effects of the third variables. Okay, so this is why we also call them control variables. So when you do your statistical analysis, you will introduce your control variables. Okay, you will introduce all these kind of third variables in order to establish a valid causal relationship. Okay, so the normal control variable we always use is what we call the demographic variables. Demographic variable, that means these demographic variables are common control variables, just like age, gender, all this, for example, occupation, something like that. So all these are demographic variables related to yourself, related to your personal profile, and this may affect some kind of other dependent variable. So these are what we call the control variable. Why do we do that? All because of this. We need to establish the so-called non-spuriousness. That means spurious, that means wrong. Non-spurious, that means not wrong. Okay. So we need to make sure there are no other variable causing we observe the covariation between the independent and the dependent variables. Okay, and we try to eliminate as many third variables as possible. So this is why it is difficult to establish a valid causality, because you need to eliminate a lot of control variables, a lot of third variables. Then you may ask, how do we know about those third variables or control variables? You need to do it in literature review. In literature review, you will find out that in some previous study, they always control some variable. So that means those control variables, that means those third variables, you need to control in your own research as well. So this is the importance of doing literature review. Okay, so that is the causality condition 3. So in this case, I give you another example, but I won't explain it here because I don't have much time. So actually, you can see by yourself. Actually, I wrote it in a very comprehensive handout. You can consult my handout. Okay, now we talk about the logic between quantitative research and qualitative research. So this is just a review. We have inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning, that means moving from particular to general. What is moving from particular to general? In that case, it is quite simple. Induction, that means we have individual cases. We have individual observation. By contrasting and comparing these individual cases, we come up with some general conclusion. So this is more abstract. Okay, I can't write it here. This is more abstract. So this is induction. That means you start with individual observation, contrast comparing these individual observation, and you come up with some general conclusion, general statement. So that is induction. So this is why it is known as moving from the particular to the general. That is from a set of specific observation to discovery of pattern that represents some degree of order among all given events. That means you find out something in common for them. So a pattern, something like that. So this is moving from particular to the general. So this is inductive reasoning, induction. Deduction is the other way around. Move from the general to the specific. What's that mean? That means you start with a general statement. For example, start with a theoretical statement, a theory, and you derive some observation here. Okay, so this is from general to particular. For example, I give you a very interesting statement. For example, all men like to cheat. So this is a very general statement, okay? And say Simon is a boy, is a man. Simon will cheat. You get what I mean? So in this case, the general statement is all men will cheat. So this is general, very general. Simon is a particular man. And we come up with deductive reasoning because all men will cheat. And Simon is a man. So Simon will cheat. You know what I mean? So this is deductive reasoning. So in a way, why do we need inductive reasoning and deductive? Where's my cursor? Here. Deductive reasoning. Because when we do qualitative research, we often use inductive reasoning. When we do quantitative research, we use deductive reasoning. Okay, so basically, this is two types of reasoning for two types of research methods. Inductive reasoning for qualitative research, deductive reasoning for quantitative research. Okay, and actually, this is the wheel of science. What's that mean? Deductive reasoning is we try to derive some particular empirical statement from theories. So this is deductive theory. So existing theory, we have some general theory, and we try to derive some testable hypothesis derived from the theory. For example, we say that high education is a cause of political participation. So this is a theory. The higher education a person is, the more likely he or she will participate in political issues. Okay, so this is a general theory. We are not referring to anyone. Actually, it applies to everyone. Okay, so we can derive some theory, some empirical, testable hypothesis from this theory. So this is deduction, right? From general to particular. For example, I want to study Hong Kong. That theory, education, give rise to political participation. This is in general applying to the whole world, not just Hong Kong, but also the United States, also mainland China, maybe also apply to Taiwan, apply to Europe, something like that. So when I try to derive some testable hypothesis, for example, in Hong Kong, I can say something like this. People with higher education in Hong Kong will more likely to participate in, say, the anti-extradition movement. So in this case, this is very specific occasions. So I'm trying to deduce something concrete from the general, more abstract theory. Okay, so this is deduction. And actually, this deduction, we need to test it to see whether it is correct or not empirically. To see what I already mentioned, that is highly educated people. So this is one way to talk about it, are more likely to join protests. Very specific, not all kind of political affairs, but just one sort of political affairs, protests. Or more specifically, not the anti-extradition movement. You know what I mean? So this is a kind of deduction, and we can test it. And we can see whether these empirical statements are correct or not. Empirical, that means in the real world. So by observing, collecting data and testing it, doing some statistical analysis, this is quantitative research, we come up with some conclusion. And we find out that not all educated people join the movement, and we want to find out why. But deductive method cannot tell you why. So instead of finding out the reason why some educated people, like university professor, like a university professor in, say, in law department in CTU, Liang Meifan, okay, why she didn't join, okay? So maybe we try to find out some reason for it. So in this case, we try to do the induction. We go back to specific cases to examine why didn't they join. So we call Liang Meifan and ask for an interview to see why, to ask her the reason why she didn't join or even condemn the protester. You know what I mean? So in this case, this is a kind of induction. You are trying to use qualitative research to compensate the drawback of your quantitative research. The quantitative research cannot tell you why in this case. Sometimes they can tell you why, but in this case, because the quantitative research, that means you try to find out whether educated people in Hong Kong more likely join the movement, but you find out that some educated people didn't join, and you want to know why. So you want to supplement your research. You go back to the qualitative research using induction. Try to interview, try to observe specific cases, like Liang Meifan or other teachers, they didn't join the movement, or some professional, they didn't join the movement, to see why. And then after getting the information, after getting the data, you try to refine your theories, refine the so-called the general part. Okay? Oh, you find out that discipline, academic discipline, affect the educated people whether they join the movement or not. For example, maybe you find out that those people in science department are less likely to join, even they are highly educated. But those highly educated people in social science are more likely to join. Maybe you find out something like this through your qualitative research, through induction. You know what I mean? So this will go on and go on. That means in this case, you can use deduction to test your theory. And maybe you find out something wrong. And then you use induction to qualitative research to find out why and what can be modified. And then you modify your theory, it becomes a new theory. So this is theoretical development. And then you test your new theory again. And then you may find out something wrong. And then you do the induction again, do qualitative research again, and refine your theory again, and then test it. This cycle go on and on. So this is what we call the wheel of science. So this is the scientific progress, no matter in natural science or in social science. So in natural science, of course, they derive some specific experiment. Experiment is about a particular case, okay, and test it to see whether the theory is correct or not. If not, then they modify the theory. So in this case, that means this is the wheel of science. Okay, got it? So it goes back to the very beginning, the qualitative research and the quantitative research. The qualitative research method includes a lot of things. So ethnography, case study, field study, ground theory, document study, naturalistic inquiry, observational study, interview, descriptive study. You can get a lot of names of it. That means there are various ways of doing qualitative research. That means you can do just observing, or you can interview people, or you can do some kind of what we call the document analysis. You go to the government archive and read all the documents. Okay, so these are the qualitative research. Okay, in my course, I will just talk about observation and interview. Okay, I won't talk about ethnography. I won't talk about grounded theory. I won't talk about case study. I won't talk about documentary study, because there are too many qualitative research methods. Okay, I just focus on two you mostly use: interview and observation. So in your final year project of doing research in future, you normally employ these two methods. So I just spent one lecture to talk about interview and observation. Okay. And qualitative research is actually multi-method in focus. That means in doing your qualitative research, you always employ many of them, not just one of them. And also involve interpretation. What is interpretation? That means when you interview someone and your informant gives you some answer, you need to interpret their answers. Okay? Because sometimes they have some peculiar languages. That means the peculiar language they use. They are very different from others, maybe. For example, maybe for you kids, you have in your in-group, you may have different languages from outsiders. For the youngster, they have a language that older people cannot understand. So in that case, I mean, once you get the answers, you always need some kind of interpretation. Okay, that is qualitative research. But in quantitative research, everything is clear beforehand, before collecting data. So qualitative research always involves interpretation. Naturalistic approach to a subject matters. Naturalistic, that means you study them in their natural environment. So you interview people at some places comfortable to them. But for quantitative research, for example, in experiment, you do it in a laboratory. A laboratory is not a natural setting. So naturalistic approach, that means most qualitative research happen in a naturalistic environment. I have a friend, she did some research on the anti-extradition movement. She always visit the protest site and try to get first-hand experience of the protester against the police. Okay, she tried to observe them in a natural environment. Natural environment, that means this is naturally happening. It is not an artificial environment. So that is a kind of naturalistic approach. Okay, and try to attempting to make sense of or interpreting phenomena in terms of meaning people bring to them. That means she want to understand why young people sacrifice themselves and to join the movement, and the movement outcome may be very, very negative. Okay, now a lot of them go to jail, something like that. But she actually want to know why they did that. So this is using their own word, using their own values, using the interviewees' words, values, belief, all these things to interpret the whole phenomenon. Okay, so this is qualitative research. It always requires subjective judgment of the researcher. Of course, the researcher has to remain objective in the sense that he or she won't input their own values to it. But it's always about interviewees' subjective feelings, subjective interpretation, subjective meaning, subjective feeling, all these kind of things. So this is why qualitative research is quite difficult to interpret, because everybody have their own agenda, have their own idea. They may interpret the same thing differently. Okay, the blue ribbon youngster may interpret as a violent crime, but the yellow ribbon youngster may describe the movement as a social justice, something like that. So this is kind of interpretation subject to interpret. Okay, and the researcher need to find out all this. So this is the qualitative research. The quantitative research often fall under the category of statistical study. That means you need to use statistics to do your quantitative research, including experimental study, survey, and other quasi experimental study. For BAM students, when you do some evaluation to evaluate some policy, in this case, that is some quasi experimental study. That means you use official statistics or the statistic gathered from those research program, like the CSSA program, something like that, to do some statistical analysis for it. So that means it always involves statistics. So for quantitative research, the steps are pretty simple, standardized. Hypothesis testing. I mean, you derive some hypothesis from theories and try to test it. For experimental setting, that means you derive theories and use human subject to do the experiment to test it. For program evaluation, for evaluative study to evaluate social policy, so your hypothesis testing is the mission of the program. The mission of the program saying that, say, to reduce the susceptible virus carrier, something like that, when we talk about the testing right now, launched by the government. So you can derive your hypothesis from the mission of the program and test whether those missions achieve or not. So hypothesis testing, in a way, that means you try to test to see whether those mission of the policy program being achieved or not. So that means you can derive research hypothesis from theory, but for applied research like policy research, you derive your hypothesis from the mission statement, or sometimes hidden mission statement. And you conceptualizing and operationalizing the variables, then turn them into something observable and measurable. And then you measure the variable, do the statistical analysis, and make the conclusion. So these are the standard procedures, standard steps for doing quantitative research. Okay, so unlike quantitative research is pretty standardized. So when you write your research proposal, I want you to write a quantitative research proposal, because they are definite, very clear step to follow. Okay, you won't miss it. Okay. So what are the differences between quantitative and qualitative research methods? There are differences in terms of approach. Approach is that quantitative researchers are actually aimed at testing. So hypothesis testing. That means to test whether the existing theories are correct or not. And in this case, they are deductively oriented. Well, when you try to test a theory, how do you test a theory? Test the theory is using deductive logic. Deductive logic is that you have a theory. You have a theory. This is general, right? You deduce some concrete empirical statement from it. Empirical, that means happen in the real world. So, for example, this general theory applied to the whole world. You just want to examine Hong Kong. For example, education course participation. Higher education people will more likely to participate politically. So education course political participation. You examine Hong Kong people, or actually you examine age, particular age, just young people in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, as well as in Singapore, something like that. So that means one general theory can give you different types of what we call empirical statement. Regarding to the place, just Hong Kong. Regarding to the age, you just want to examine the young people in different places, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and in Singapore. Or you can do a lot of things. You can deduce a lot of empirical statement from one general field. Okay? So this is mostly deductively oriented, and you want to test that. And concepts are transformed into distinct variables. For example, when you talk about education, you can transform it into, say, in Hong Kong, we can have primary education, secondary education, and tertiary education, something like that. Or you can conceptualize it, think differently in terms of years of education. You may ask people, how many years have you been in school, something like that. Or maybe it's quite different in Hong Kong from in Germany. I don't know the German system. They may not have the so-called the tertiary and secondary, something like that. They may have a different system. So that means in different places, when you try to make education observable and measurable, it may require different types of conceptualization, okay? Or what we call operationalization, okay? So that is the approach. But for qualitative research is inductively oriented. That means you start from particular cases and try to make some general statement about those particular cases. Okay, so this is qualitative research, and they always involve interpretation. That means capturing and discovering the meaning behind those phenomena. And concepts are discovered in terms of themes, motive, generalization, and typology. So actually, when you do your qualitative research, the whole qualitative research is help you to conceptualize. So unlike the quantitative research, that means after doing the qualitative research, the outcome may be just producing or refining some concept. Okay, so this is what your qualitative research is. Okay, qualitative research just trying to maybe refining some concept or give you some idea how to modify the existing theory. That means in terms of conceptualization or even in terms of causal relationship. For example, maybe you have different variable, the causal order may be very different. What's that mean, causal order? So for example, father education and your education. So sometimes there's a way to talk about the higher your father education is, the more likely you have higher education. But doing qualitative research, maybe you find out something in between. What is in between? Even though your father has high education, your education level may not be so high. Why? So in this case is whether your father intervened into your study. Okay? Into your study. If your father or those fathers who did not intervene into their kids' study, then this causal relationship disappears. So how can you find out that? You find this out through qualitative research. So that means it may affect the existing theory. Instead of three variable, instead of two variable, now you have three variable. Father education, whether intervention or not, intervention into your study or not, and your educational level. Before that, you have just two variables. But now you have one more in between, whether your father intervened your study. Intervene your study will affect this relationship. Later on, we'll talk more about that. Okay. So this is how qualitative research works. So remember, qualitative research and quantitative research are supplementary to one another. There's no way to talk about which one is more useful. Actually, both are useful. It depends on what kind of research question you are asking. Okay, your research question may determine what types of quantitative or qualitative research you want to use. Okay, so remember, research question formulation is very, very important. So another difference in terms of data and result. Data, of course, quantitative research method getting data in terms of number. So qualitative research method getting data more intensive and multifaceted. So the way to collect data is that in quantitative research, the steps are standardized, are very strict. You need to follow every step of it. But in qualitative research, when you do qualitative research, the key features is flexibility. You always adjust, you always change, you always modify. There's no standard procedures. So in this case, this is two very different things. As a qualitative researcher, for example, Benny tried to interview people, interview youngsters, and actually there's no standard way for him. Okay, so no standard way to actually get the informants. For example, the informant may not answer honestly. That means you need your own experience to get the real truth, real facts from your interviewees, from the informant. That means informant may lie So this is why you need to be flexible. But for quantitative research, these are questionnaires. You just ask those questions. Of course, they may lie, but anyway, because it is in large number, so lying only constitute a very small proportion of the questionnaire, and that is okay. So that means in terms of flexibility, qualitative research is very flexible. Quantitative research is inflexible. Actually, quantitative research are very, very rigid. You need to follow all standardized procedures. And data collection in quantitative research is prepared. Prepared, that means this is your proposal. Your proposal is a plan before data collection. So everything has been settled in your research proposal for quantitative research. But for qualitative research, data collection is quite ad hoc and situational. That means you do not have a plan for how you collect data. You change your plan once you collect data, because sometimes you collect some data and tell you something wrong. So you may collect another types of data. So this is why it is difficult to write a qualitative research proposal. So this is your exercise. Your exercise is to write quantitative, not qualitative research proposal, because of the nature of the research. So the research can usually be replicated or repeated. So because they are pre-planned, because they are standardized procedures, it is easy for other researchers to do the research again, to replicate, to repeat the research. But for qualitative research, it is difficult. Maybe the informant is bad, and you have no way to interview other people, will no way to interview the same person again. So that is the problem for qualitative research. So as a result, the data usually gathered using more structured research instruments. Structured research instruments, that means they are rigid. You cannot change that. But in qualitative research, the research instruments are less structured. Just a guideline. They're guideline instead of rigid questionnaire for interview. So sometimes people may require you to give them some interview guideline before accepting your interview. Then you just give them some brief questions. So these questions are less structured, and actually most of the questions are open-ended. Open-ended. You can answer whatever you want. But in quantitative research, you have option for them to choose yes or no question. Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree options. So in quantitative research, they are well structured, the answer options. And the result based on large sample size. Quantitative research requires, say, several hundreds of informants. But for qualitative research, 10, 20, 30 informants sometimes is sufficient. Okay, the number is much smaller in qualitative research. Why? Because in qualitative research, you are not aiming generalizing. You are not aiming at describing the whole world in the same way. But quantitative research do. They want to infer from sample to population. Okay, so this is the big difference. So that difference is, this is important. The finding can be generalized to the population, but the result provide less detail on behaviors, attitudes, and motivation. That means that result, you can say, when you get something from a sample, you can say something about the whole population. Okay, so this is a good thing. So this is why the government wanted. Okay, when you get a small sample, say 200 people, and you get the result, and the result of these 200 people can say about the whole Hong Kong 7 million people. Okay, so that is the merit, that is the advantage of doing quantitative research. So the government like it. But for the qualitative approach, they are more in-depth. The result provide much more detail on behavior and attitude, but cannot be generalized to the whole population. So in this case, I mean, qualitative research give you a lot of ideas, give you some stories, but these stories cannot apply to the whole population. You interview, say, 20 people in Hong Kong. These 20 people may have different story, but these stories cannot be applied to the whole population. But these stories are very intensive, in-depth. You learn a lot about that. But for quantitative research, although you have 200 people, They answer several questions, but you don't know them actually. You don't know them in depth, but you do know them what you measure them. For example, their educational level, their education level related to their political participation level. Besides that, you know nothing. Okay, so this is the difference. One is more in depth, more rich. You may say that qualitative research is rich in information, but quantitative research is powerful in terms of the size, in terms of the application of the result to a huge population. But they are thin, shallow. You just know a few things, nothing more. Okay, so this is the difference. You may say that quantitative is good at size, but shallow. Qualitative research is very rich, but limited in size, limited in application to a lot of people. So again, in your research question, you may answer something like that. For example, in your research question, you ask some question about a large population. Okay, then quantitative research design may be good for you. But if your research,
Mr. Lee,
yeah,
for our social research, do we get to choose between quantitative, qualitative, or do you have to do both of them?
What? Pardon?
For our research, do we get to choose between quantitative and qualitative, or do we have to do both of them?
Yeah, sometimes it depends. So for some complicated research, they did do both. But for you, when you do your research proposal, just one, just do the quantitative research proposal. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So okay, yeah. So that is the data and result. Okay. The analysis is also different. The quantitative research, you need statistics. You do the statistical analysis, do the number. Okay. For qualitative research, this is more subjective, as I mentioned before. You actually extract some themes of generalization from evidence collected in the field. That means through contrasting and comparing the cases, the small number of cases you examine, you interview, you come up with some type. For example, you interview 10, 20 youngsters, they join the protest. Then you may find out some type using some common sense. Okay, some type like some are radicals. Okay, some are radical. Some are very neutral. Some are leftists. 左膠. Okay, so in interviewing you may find out some types. So this is some kind of themes or generalizing typology you got from the qualitative research. Okay, so this is about conceptualization. That means you want to find out the nature of protest. You conceptualize them into different types, different categories. Okay, so this is qualitative research. So in this case, the result, the analysis are very different from quantitative research and qualitative research. Okay, you need to do a lot of things in qualitative research. You may need to transcribe the interview and try to look at the interview again and again to extract some useful information from those cases and try to group them together to form some types, okay, or to form some themes. Okay, one of the themes is because they are angry about the police brutality, a lot of people come out and join the other protests for the older people, maybe more, and join the youngsters in their movement. Okay, so maybe you find out something like this. Okay, so this is qualitative research. So the step for quantitative research, again, they are the same. Literature review, deriving hypothesis from literature review, research design, doing survey, experiment, or whatever. Data analysis, data collection, data analysis, that means the statistical analysis, and drawing implication for theories. So this is the same step. Okay, so this is why I stress it again in your research proposal. You better do a quantitative research. It is easy to follow. For qualitative research, sometimes you have specific observations, selecting some typical or given cases, okay, and try to detect the patterns from the data. That means you contrast and compare to see whether any pattern appears. and then you interpret their answers if you do in the wheel, or interpret your observation if you do participant observation, and try to draw implication to existing theories and formulate new hypotheses. So hypothesis testing is at the end of your qualitative research. So remember this cycle, the cycle, the wheel of scientific progress. Induction, qualitative research help you to modify theory. So this is why formulating new hypothesis and theory is the end product of qualitative research. So when we go back to the cycle here, so you can see that this is qualitative research. Pattern finding something, you try to modify existing theory. So the end product, actually the end product of qualitative research is formulating new hypothesis and theory. And the end product of quantitative research is theory testing. So this is why you derive hypothesis and test it to see whether the theory is good or not. So we trying back to this one. So this is quantitative research. Oh, this is quantitative research. This is qualitative research. Okay. So we complete the cycle. I give you a more detailed cycle here. It involves different types of qualitative and quantitative, and some overlapping. Overlapping is here actually about theory. This is both qualitative and quantitative research actually doing. So this is a more completed cycle here. And one more thing about this is about the how you do your research, and actually this is related. So this part is qualitative research, and this part is quantitative research. Okay, so you see the difference, how they differ in terms of this cycle. There's another way to present their relationship, the quantitative and qualitative research, how qualitative and quantitative research are supplementing and complementing one another. I mean, we cannot say quantitative research is superior to qualitative research or vice versa. They are both important, okay? It depends on your research question. So this is why formulating your research question is the first step of doing social science, or actually doing natural science as well. Okay, this concludes the first lecture. Okay, we will meet again next week. And if you have any questions, okay, just you can email me, whatever. Okay, especially when you cannot attend tutorial online because of the problem of Moodle, just tell me, or I will talk to your tutor, or you can send an email to your tutor and CC me as well, inform me as well. Okay, any other question? Do you have any question? No question? So if no question, then see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.